The cold metal floor pressed against Kira's bruised cheek as she lay motionless in the corner of her cell. 7 days. 7 endless days since the Vorthon raiders had torn her from her research station on the Outer Rim. 7 days of systematic torture designed to break her spirit and extract information about human defensive positions. The cell door hissed open, and Kira didn't bother looking up. She knew what was coming. The same routine that had played out every few hours since her capture. The electric prods, the psychological torment, the alien voices demanding she betray her own species. Her body trembled involuntarily, a Pavlovian response to the sound of approaching footsteps. "The human still resists," growled Commander Thax, his forearms gesturing dismissively at Kira's crumpled form. The Vorthon's chitinous exoskeleton gleamed. Under the harsh cell lighting, and his compound eyes reflected no mercy. "Perhaps we have been too gentle." Kira forced herself to remain still, even as terror coursed through her veins. She had given them nothing. Not the location of the hidden human colonies, not the defensive grid passwords, not even her real name. But she could feel her resolve cracking like ice under pressure. How much more could she endure? The torture. Specialist, a smaller Vorthon called Vex, clicked his mandibles in what passed for laughter among his species. The human's neural patterns show extreme stress fractures. Another session with the pain amplifiers should complete the conditioning process. "Good," Thax replied, his voice carrying the satisfied tone of a predator closing in on wounded prey. "High Command grows impatient. They want those colony locations before the human fleet realizes their spy is missing." Kira's heart sank. Spy? They thought she was military intelligence, not a xenobiologist who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The irony would have been laughable if it weren't so terrifying. She possessed none of the information they sought, which meant the torture would continue indefinitely until they finally accepted the truth or she died from the abuse. The pain amplifiers hummed to life, and Kira bit down hard on her tongue to stifle the scream that wanted to escape. The devices sent cascading waves of agony through her nervous system, making every cell in her body feel like it was being consumed by fire. Her vision blurred, and consciousness began to slip away like sand through her fingers. In the haze of pain, she almost missed the distant rumble that seemed to shake the entire ship. Thax's head snapped up, his antennae twitching with sudden alertness. The rumble came again, followed by what sounded like weapon discharges echoing through the vessel's corridors. "What is that?" Vex demanded, his previous confidence evaporating. Before Thax could respond, the ship's emergency klaxons began wailing. Red warning lights bathed the cell in an ominous glow, and an automated voice announced something in the harsh Vorthon language. Thax's expression shifted from confusion to alarm, then to something that looked disturbingly like fear. "Impossible," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the alarms. "The humans couldn't have found us. Our position was encrypted beyond their primitive technology." Another explosion, closer this time, sent vibrations through the deck plating. Kira allowed herself a small spark of hope, even as the pain amplifiers continued their relentless assault on her nervous system. Perhaps her captivity was about to end one way or another. The cell door burst inward with a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Through the smoking breach stepped a figure that made Thax stumble backward in shock. The human was tall and lean, dressed in what appeared to be improvised combat gear. His face was streaked with alien blood, and his eyes held a cold fury that seemed to drop the temperature in the cell by several degrees. "Step away from her," the human said, his voice carrying an authority that transcended species barriers. His weapon, some kind of energy rifle salvaged from Vorthon corpses, remained trained on Thax's center mass. Tom had been tracking the raider ship for 3 days, ever since he'd received Kira's distress beacon. A freelance salvage operator with a reputation for finding the impossible, he'd called in every favor and broken half a dozen interstellar laws to mount this one-man rescue operation. The sight of Kira's broken form on the cell floor ignited something primal and protective within him. Thax recovered from his initial shock and raised his forearms threateningly. "You are alone, human. Surrender now, and your death will be swift." Tom's response was to shift his aim and fire a single shot that severed 2 of Thax's arms at the joints. The Vorthon commander screamed and fell to his knees, green ichor pooling around him. Vex scrambled for the alarm panel, but Tom's second shot turned the smaller alien into rapidly dispersing molecular particles. "I said step away from her," Tom repeated, his voice never rising above a conversational tone. The contrast between his calm demeanor and the violence he'd just unleashed was deeply unsettling to the surviving Vorthon. Thax crawled backward, leaving a trail of his own blood. "The human fleet. How did they find us?" "There is no fleet," Tom replied, kneeling beside Kira and gently checking her pulse. Her breathing was shallow but steady, and her eyes flickered with recognition when she saw his face. "Just me." The worst revelation hit Thax like a physical blow. "One human destroyed my ship?" Tom didn't bother responding. He was busy examining the pain amplifiers still attached to Kira's neural pathways. The devices were crude but effective, designed to overwhelm the victim's nervous system with artificial agony. Removing them improperly could cause permanent brain damage or death. "Can you hear me?" he asked softly, his voice a stark contrast to the cold efficiency he'd shown moments before. Kira managed a weak nod. "Tom," she whispered, her voice hoarse, "from screaming. How did you find me?" "Your emergency beacon," he explained while carefully studying the amplifier connections. "I've been following your signal for 72 hours. Sorry it took so long." Despite everything she'd endured, Kira almost smiled. Only Tom would apologize for mounting an impossible rescue mission 3 days after receiving a distress call. She'd known him for 2 years, ever since he'd salvaged her research equipment from a derelict space station, and his understated heroism never ceased to amaze her. "The amplifiers," she gasped as another wave of artificial pain coursed through her body. "They're keyed to my nervous system. Remove them wrong and you'll die," Tom finished, his fingers hovering over the complex alien machinery. "I know. Give me a minute to figure this out." Behind them, Thax continued to bleed and mutter threats about human arrogance and Vorthon superiority. Tom ignored him completely, all his attention focused on the intricate web of neural interfaces. He'd seen similar devices before during his salvage operations, though never one so sophisticated or malicious in their design. "The primary node," Kira whispered, her eyes closing as she fought against unconsciousness. "Disconnect the primary node first, then the secondary relays in reverse order of installation." Tom's hands moved with surprising delicacy for someone who'd just single-handedly assaulted an alien warship. One by one, he disconnected the pain amplifiers, each removal bringing visible relief to Kira's tortured features. When the last device fell away, she sagged against him like a puppet with severed strings. "Easy," he murmured, gathering her carefully into his arms. "We're getting out of here." Thax laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "You think you've won? This ship carries 40 crew members. They will hunt you through every corridor until—" Tom's third shot silenced the Vorthan commander permanently. As he carried Kira toward the destroyed cell door, she looked up at him with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. 40 crew members?" she asked weakly. 37 now, Tom replied matter-of-factly. "I wasn't subtle getting here." The corridor outside Kira's cell was a testament to Tom's methodical approach to ship infiltration. Scorch marks decorated the walls where energy weapons had discharged, and the acrid smell of burned circuitry hung heavy in the recycled air. 3 Vorthan corpses lay scattered across the deck plating, their chitinous armor no match for the precision of Tom's salvaged weaponry. "How did you get aboard?" Kira asked as Tom carried her through the devastation. Her voice was stronger now, but her legs still refused to support her weight. "Service hatch on the port cargo bay," Tom replied, his eyes constantly scanning for threats. Vorthans always forget to properly seal their maintenance access points. Sloppy engineering. A distant rumble echoed through the ship's superstructure, followed by the unmistakable sound of running footsteps. Tom quickly ducked into an alcove, setting Kira down gently behind a bulkhead support beam. His expression had shifted back to the cold, calculating mask he'd worn in the cell. "Stay quiet," he whispered, checking the charge level on his energy rifle. "And stay hidden." The first group of Vorthon security troops rounded the corner at a dead run, their weapons raised and their compound eyes scanning for targets. They never saw Tom emerge from the shadows behind them. His weapon discharged 3 times in rapid succession, and 3 aliens fell before they could even cry out in alarm. Kira watched in fascination and horror as Tom moved through the ship like a force of nature. He seemed to anticipate every tactical decision the Vorthans made, positioning himself to exploit their weaknesses before they even realized they had them. His movements were economical and precise, wasting no energy on unnecessary flourishes or displays of prowess. "You're military," she said when he returned to her hiding spot. It wasn't a question. Tom paused in his weapon maintenance, his hands stilling on the rifle's power coupling. "Was military. Long time ago. Special forces? Something like that." He helped her to her feet, noting with satisfaction that her legs seemed more stable now. "Can you walk?" Kira tested her weight on shaking limbs. "I think so. Where are we going?" "My ship," Tom replied, leading her deeper into the Vorthan vessel. "It's docked to their cargo bay. We'll be off this floating nightmare." In 10 minutes, they moved through the corridors with increasing urgency as the ship's alarm systems continued their electronic wailing. Tom had disabled the primary communications array during his initial infiltration, but he knew the remaining crew would eventually coordinate an organized response to his presence. "Contact!" The voice belonged to a Vorthan scout who had appeared at the far end of the corridor. The alien's weapon was already rising when Tom's shot took him in the center of his thorax. The scout fell backward, his dying breath activating. "A portable communicator. All units converge on Corridor 7, the device crackled with urgent alien voices. "The human is moving toward the cargo bay." Tom cursed under his breath and quickened their pace. The element of surprise was gone, which meant the next phase of their escape would require a more direct approach. He could hear the sound of multiple footsteps echoing from several directions as the surviving Vorthans closed in on their position. "How many more?" Kira asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "Enough," Tom replied grimly. "Stay close, and do exactly what I tell you when I tell you to do it." The cargo bay doors were sealed when they arrived, but Tom had expected that. He pulled a small device from his salvage kit and attached it to the door's locking mechanism. The molecular disruptor made short work of the Vorthan security systems, and the massive doors began to cycle open. Beyond the threshold, Tom's ship waited like a metallic lifeline. The Wanderer was a modified cargo hauler with enhanced engines and defensive systems, perfect for a man who made his living in the dangerous spaces between civilized worlds. Its airlock stood open, a rectangle of warm light in the cold darkness of the alien ship. "Run," Tom said simply. They sprinted across the cargo bay as energy bolts began raining down from the upper galleries. The Vorthans had finally organized their pursuit, and their shots came dangerously close to finding their targets. Tom returned fire while running, his shots precise enough to force the aliens into cover, but not accurate enough to eliminate them entirely. Kira reached the Wanderers' airlock first, stumbling through the threshold and into the familiar embrace of human engineering. Tom followed a moment later, sealing the door behind them as energy bolts scorched the hull around the entrance. "Strap in," he called, racing toward the cockpit. "This is going to get interesting." The Wanderer's engines roared to life with a sound that Kira had never heard before. A deep, throaty growl that seemed to come from the ship's very soul. Through the small porthole beside her acceleration couch, she could see Vorthan crew members scrambling to seal the cargo bay and prevent their escape. "Docking clamps are still engaged," Tom called from the cockpit, his hands dancing across the control panels with practiced efficiency. "Hold on, this might get rough." The ship lurched forward against the restraining mechanisms, its enhanced engines straining against the alien technology. Sparks flew from overloaded circuits, and the entire vessel shuddered under the conflicting forces. Tom pushed the throttle to maximum, and something in the Vorthan docking system finally gave way with a screech of tortured metal. The Wanderer burst free from the cargo bay like a cork from a bottle, tumbling end over end as Tom fought to regain control. Through the cockpit viewport, Kira could see the massive bulk of the Vorthan warship falling away below them, its weapon ports beginning to glow with charging energy. "They're powering weapons," she warned, her voice tight with renewed fear. "I know," Tom replied, his voice eerily calm despite their desperate situation. "Their targeting systems are too slow to track something this small. We'll be fine as long as—" The first energy beam missed them by less than 50 meters, its passage close enough to overload several of the Wanderer's sensor arrays. Tom cursed and threw the ship into a spiraling evasive pattern that pressed Kira deep into her acceleration couch. "You were saying?" she managed through gritted teeth. I was wrong about their targeting systems, Tom admitted, yanking the ship through another impossible maneuver. They've been upgraded since the last intelligence reports. More energy beams lanced through the space around them, each shot coming closer than the last. The Vorthon gunners were learning to anticipate Tom's evasive patterns, and the Wanderer lacked the armor to survive even a glancing hit from the warship's main batteries. Tom's solution was characteristically direct and completely insane. Instead of continuing to flee in a straight line, he reversed course and dove directly toward the Vorthon vessel, using its own bulk as cover from its weapon systems. The maneuver brought them so close to the alien hull that Kira could see individual Vorthons staring out through observation ports. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Something they won't expect," Tom replied, his fingers flying over the weapons controls. The Wanderer was primarily a cargo hauler, but Tom had made extensive modifications over the years. Hidden weapon ports opened along the ship's belly, revealing military-grade plasma cannons. The first volley struck the Vorthon ship's sensor array, blinding it to their precise location. The second destroyed its primary communications dish, cutting off its ability to call for reinforcement. The third punched through the warship's reactor shielding, causing a cascade failure that would leave the vessel dead in space within minutes. "Reactor breach imminent," Tom announced, pulling the Wanderer away from the dying warship. "We need to be elsewhere when that thing goes up." The explosion, when it came, was visible even through the ship's polarized viewports. The Vorthon warship disappeared in a brief, brilliant star that painted the surrounding space in shades of gold and crimson. Debris scattered in all directions, some pieces large enough to pose a navigation hazard for years to come. Kira stared at the expanding cloud of wreckage with a mixture of awe and horror. "You destroyed an entire warship." "They had it coming," Tom replied matter-of-factly, already plotting a course for the nearest human settlement. "Besides, it was self-defense." "Self-defense?" Kira's voice rose in disbelief. "You infiltrated their ship, killed their crew, and blew up their reactor." Tom turned in his pilot's seat to look at her directly. For the first time since the rescue began, his expression showed something other than cold efficiency. The mask had slipped, revealing the man beneath, and what she saw there made her breath catch in her throat. "They tortured you," he said simply, his voice carrying an edge of barely controlled fury. "For 7 days they tortured you. That's not something I can let slide." The quiet intensity in his words made Kira realize something that should have been obvious from the beginning. Tom hadn't mounted this rescue operation out of simple friendship or salvager's honor. The risks he'd taken, the laws he'd broken, the sheer audacity of his single-man assault on a Vorthon warship. None of it made sense unless viewed through the lens of something much deeper than casual concern. "Tom," she began, but he had already turned back to his controls. "Get some rest," he said, his voice carefully neutral again. "We've got a 12-hour burn to the nearest medical facility. You need proper treatment for what they did to you." Kira settled back into her acceleration couch, her mind reeling from everything that had happened. 7 days of torture had broken something inside her. But somehow Tom's impossible rescue had begun the process of putting her back together. She closed her eyes and let the steady thrum of the Wanderer's engines carry her towards something that might eventually resemble peace. Behind them, the debris field that had once been a Vorthon warship continued to expand into the void. The medical facility on Station Gamma was little more than an automated treatment bay and a single overworked doctor. But it was the closest thing to proper health care within 3 jump points. Dr. Wells, a gruff ex-military physician who asked no questions and charged reasonable rates, took one look at Kira's condition and immediately began preparing the neural reconstruction chamber. "Vorthon pain amplifiers," he muttered, running a medical scanner over Kira's still trembling form. "Haven't seen damage like this since the border wars." "How long were they active?" 7 days, Tom replied from his position by the door. He hadn't left Kira's side since they docked. Maintaining a protective vigilance that spoke to depths of concern he refused to acknowledge verbally. Dr. Wells whistled low. 7 days of continuous neural stimulation should have killed her, or driven her permanently insane. The fact that she's still coherent is remarkable. Kira managed a weak smile from the treatment table. "I'm tougher than I look." "You're tougher than anyone has a right to be," the doctor replied, adjusting the chamber's settings. This is going to take several hours. The neural pathways need to be carefully reconstructed, and we can't rush the process without risking permanent damage. Tom settled into a chair beside the treatment bay, clearly intending to maintain his vigil throughout the procedure. Dr. Wells glanced between the two of them with the knowing expression of someone who had seen similar dynamics play out countless times in his practice. "She'll be fine," the doctor said quietly. "But you need to understand that recovery from this kind of trauma isn't just physical. The psychological damage may take longer to heal." "I know," Tom replied, his eyes never leaving Kira's face as the treatment chamber hummed to life around her. "Whatever it takes." The next few hours passed in relative silence. The neural reconstruction process was automated but delicate, requiring constant monitoring to ensure the damaged pathways regenerated properly. Tom watched the readouts with the intensity of a man studying battlefield intelligence, memorizing every fluctuation and trend as if his attention alone could guarantee a successful outcome. "You didn't have to do this," Kira said during one of her conscious periods between treatment cycles. Her voice was stronger now, but exhaustion still weighed heavily on her features. "Yes, I did," Tom replied without hesitation. "Why?" The question hung in the recycled air between them, carrying implications that neither had been willing to address directly. Tom was quiet for so long that Kira thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability she had never heard before. "Because the thought of you suffering was more than I could bear," he said simply. "Because in the 2 years I've known you, you've become the most important thing in my life. Because I'd rather die than live in a universe where someone could hurt you and get away with it." The words hit Kira like a physical blow, not because they were unexpected, but because they confirmed what her heart had already known. The quiet salvager who had rescued her wasn't just a friend willing to take extraordinary risks. He was a man who loved her with a fierce intensity that had driven him to impossible acts of heroism. "Tom," she whispered, reaching out with one hand to touch his face. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "Because you're brilliant," he replied, leaning into her touch. "Because you're destined for great things, and I'm just a salvage operator who spends his time digging through the wreckage of other people's failures. What could I possibly offer someone like you?" The absurdity of his reasoning struck Kira with crystalline clarity. Here was a man who had single-handedly assaulted an alien warship to rescue her, who had killed dozens of enemies without hesitation, who had risked everything simply because she mattered to him, and he thought himself unworthy of her attention. "You saved my life," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You fought through an entire ship of hostile aliens because you couldn't bear the thought of me suffering. You destroyed a warship with a cargo hauler because you love me. How can you possibly think that's not enough?" Dr. Wells cleared his throat from across the room, reminding them of his presence. "The treatment's nearly complete," he announced, tactfully giving them a moment to compose themselves. "Neural activity is returning to normal parameters, and the psychological trauma indicators are showing significant improvement." Tom squeezed Kira's hand gently. "How do you feel?" She considered the question carefully, taking inventory of her physical and mental state. The constant background ache that had plagued her since the rescue was finally fading, and her thoughts felt clearer than they had in days. More importantly, the crushing despair that had threatened to overwhelm her during captivity had been replaced by something she had almost forgotten existed: hope. "Better," she said, and meant it. "Much better." The treatment chamber cycled down with a soft chime, and Dr. Wells began the final diagnostic scans. "Remarkable," he muttered, studying the readouts. "Complete neural pathway restoration, no residual trauma indicators, and psychological stress levels within normal parameters. Whatever kept you sane during those 7 days of torture, it's still protecting you now." Kira looked at Tom, understanding, flooding through her with perfect clarity. She knew exactly what had kept her sane during the darkest moments of her captivity. The absolute certainty that somewhere in the universe, someone would move heaven and earth to find her. She had held on to that faith even when logic told her it was impossible, even when despair threatened to consume her entirely. "Love," she said simply. "Love kept me sane." 3 days later, they sat in the Wanderer's small galley, sharing a meal of reconstituted protein and recycled coffee, while the ship made its way toward the inner colonies. Kira's physical recovery was complete, but the psychological healing process was more complex. She found herself startling at unexpected sounds and struggling with periods of inexplicable anxiety, legacy effects of her week in captivity. Tom had been unfailingly patient, adjusting his behavior to accommodate her needs without making her feel fragile or broken. He gave her space when she needed it, and stayed close when she sought comfort, somehow always knowing which response was appropriate. It was a level of emotional intelligence that surprised her, though perhaps it shouldn't have after everything they'd been through together. "The Colonial Authority wants to debrief you," Tom said, sliding a datapad across the table. "They're particularly interested in any intelligence you might have gathered about Vorthon's ship configurations and tactical capabilities." Kira glanced at the official communication without much enthusiasm. The last thing she wanted was to relive her captivity for the benefit of military strategists. But she understood the importance of sharing information that might prevent others from suffering similar fates. "What about you?" she asked. "Aren't they interested in how you managed to destroy an entire warship single-handedly?" Tom's expression darkened. "They're interested, all right. Turns out the Vorthon vessel I destroyed was carrying a diplomatic envoy to peace negotiations with the Terran Federation. My rescue mission may have accidentally triggered a diplomatic incident." The implications hit Kira like a cold wave. "You could be facing charges." "War crimes, actually," Tom replied with bitter humor. "Attacking a diplomatic vessel, killing non-combatants, violating interstellar law, the list goes on. My lawyer says I'm looking at 20 years in a military prison if they decide to make an example of me." Kira stared at him in horror. "But they were torturing me. You were protecting a human citizen from hostile aliens." "The law doesn't make exceptions for rescue operations," Tom said quietly. "Especially when those operations result in the deaths of diplomatic personnel. The fact that they were torturing you might be considered a mitigating factor, but it won't change the fundamental charges." The injustice of it all struck Kira with overwhelming force. Tom had risked everything to save her, had accomplished the impossible through skill and determination, and now he faced imprisonment for his heroism. The universe seemed suddenly cold and hostile, a place where good intentions and selfless acts were punished rather than rewarded. "There's something else," Tom continued, his voice carefully neutral. "The Colonial Authority has offered me a deal. Full immunity from prosecution in exchange for detailed intelligence about my infiltration methods and combat techniques. They want to recruit me for their Special Operations Division." "That's good news, isn't it?" Kira asked, though something in Tom's tone suggested otherwise. "It would mean giving up the salvage business," he explained. "No more independent operations, no more freedom to choose my own missions. I'd be a government asset, deployed wherever they decide I'm needed most." Kira began to understand the true scope of the choice facing him. Tom's independence was fundamental to who he was, a man who lived on his own terms, answering to no authority but his own conscience. Joining the Colonial Authority would mean surrendering that autonomy, even if it offered him legal protection and a chance to use his skills for the greater good. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Tom was quiet for a long moment, staring out the galley's small viewport at the stars beyond. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of decision that made Kira's heart race. "That depends on you," he said. "On me? If I take the deal, I'll be stationed wherever the Authority sends me. Could be anywhere in human space, could be deep cover operations that last for years. We might not see each other for months at a time." He turned to look at her directly. "If I refuse the deal and face trial, I'll probably spend the next 2 decades in prison." The choice he was offering her suddenly became clear. He was asking her to decide his future, to choose between a path that might keep them apart for years, and one that would definitely separate them for decades. Either way, the quiet life they might have built together was impossible. "There's a third option," Kira said slowly, an idea forming in her mind, "which is, we run." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge to fate itself. "We take the Wanderer and disappear into the Outer Rim. There are 1,000 worlds out there where the Colonial Authority has no jurisdiction, places where a skilled salvager and a xenobiologist could make a living without answering to anyone." Tom's eyes widened at the suggestion. "You'd give up your research career? Your life in civilized space?" "What life?" Kira asked with surprising vehemence. You think I can go back to my laboratory and pretend none of this happened? You think I can look at alien specimens and not remember 7 days of torture? You think I can sleep peacefully, knowing that the man who saved me is rotting in prison because he loved me enough to risk everything? The passion in her voice seemed to stun Tom into silence. He had clearly expected her to choose the practical path, to encourage him to take the authorities' deal and accept whatever separation it might require. The idea that she would abandon her career to flee with him into the lawless frontier had apparently never occurred to him. "You'd really do that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'd do anything to stay with you," Kira replied without hesitation. "These past few days have shown me what's really important. It's not my research or my reputation or my comfortable life in civilized space. It's this. Us. Together. Facing whatever the universe throws at us." Tom reached across the table and took her hands in his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "It won't be easy. Life on the rim is dangerous, unpredictable. We'd be fugitives, always looking over our shoulders. But we'd be free," Kira said, squeezing his hands, "and we'd be together." 6 months later, the Wanderer drifted through the asteroid fields of the Kepler Expanse, its sensors scanning for salvageable wrecks among the ancient debris. The outer rim had proven to be everything Tom had promised: dangerous, unpredictable, and absolutely free from the constraints of civilized space. Kira stood in the ship's modified laboratory, analyzing mineral samples from their latest salvage operation. The equipment was crude compared to what she'd had access to in her previous life, but she'd discovered that limitation bred creativity. Her research into exotic matter interactions had advanced more in 6 months of practical field work than in years of theoretical study. "Contact on the long-range sensors," Tom called from the cockpit. "Looks like a derelict freighter, Terran registry. Could be worth investigating." Kira set aside her samples and joined him at the controls. The sensor display showed a vessel of moderate size drifting powerless among the asteroids, its hull scarred by impacts but structurally intact. It was exactly the kind of find that had made their new life possible. Valuable salvage that the major corporations would never bother to retrieve from such a remote location. "Life signs?" she asked, slipping into the co-pilot's seat they'd installed for her. "Negative, but there are power signatures from the cargo bay. Could be automated systems, could be something more interesting." Tom's hands moved over the navigation controls with practiced ease, plotting an intercept course that would bring them alongside the derelict. "Want to suit up and take a look?" The question was routine now, but Kira still felt a thrill of excitement at the prospect of exploring another abandoned vessel. Her xenobiology background had proven invaluable in their salvage operations, helping them identify and safely extract alien technologies that other salvagers might have missed or mishandled. "Always," she replied, heading for the equipment locker. As they prepared for the EVA, Kira reflected on how much her life had changed since their escape from colonial authority jurisdiction. The nightmares about her captivity had gradually faded, replaced by a sense of purpose and belonging she had never experienced in her previous career. Out here on the rim, every day brought new challenges and discoveries that made her feel truly alive. Tom sealed his helmet and activated his suit's communication system. "Ready?" "Ready," Kira confirmed, running through her equipment checklist one final time. The airlock cycled, and they jetted across the void toward the derelict freighter. The vessel's hull was pitted with micrometeorite impacts and scored by energy weapon fire, suggesting it had met its end in some forgotten conflict. The cargo bay doors hung open, revealing a darkened interior that their suit lights struggled to penetrate. "Careful," Tom murmured as they entered the derelict. Unknown ship, unknown history, unknown hazards. They moved through the cargo bay methodically, cataloging potential salvage and scanning for hidden dangers. Most of the cargo containers were empty or filled with materials too common to be worth hauling, but one sealed unit near the back of the bay drew their attention. "Exotic matter containment vessel," Kira observed, studying the alien symbols etched into its surface. "This is Alterian work, very advanced, very valuable." Tom whistled appreciatively. "How valuable?" "Enough to buy us a bigger ship and better equipment," Kira replied, carefully examining the containment protocols. "Maybe enough to set us up with a proper mobile laboratory." As they worked to extract the valuable cargo, a proximity alarm sounded in their helmet communicators. Tom's head snapped up, his hand moving instinctively toward the weapon at his side. "What is it?" Kira asked, though she was already moving toward cover behind a cargo container. "3 ships, coming in fast," Tom replied, consulting his suit's tactical display. "Configuration suggests pirates, probably heard about our salvage operations and decided to investigate." The old Kira might have panicked at the prospect of another hostile encounter, but 6 months of life on the rim had taught her to think tactically under pressure. She quickly assessed their situation, calculating angles of approach and potential escape routes, while Tom prepared their defensive options. "Can we get back to the Wanderer before they intercept?" she asked. "Not with the Alterian container," Tom replied. "That thing weighs half a ton, and our maneuvering thrusters can't handle the mass in zero-G combat." Kira's mind raced through possibilities. The container was too valuable to abandon, but staying to fight 3 pirate ships in a defenseless derelict was suicide. Then an idea struck her. Dangerous, unconventional, but potentially brilliant. "What if we don't run?" she said. "What if we make them come to us?" Tom's helmet turned toward her, and she could imagine his raised eyebrow behind the faceplate. "Explain." "This freighter still has power in some sections," Kira said, her voice gaining confidence as the plan solidified. "If we can reach the bridge and activate the automated defense systems, we might be able to level the playing field." "Most civilian ships don't carry military-grade weapons," Tom pointed out, though his tone suggested he was considering the idea. "Most civilian ships don't carry Alterian exotic matter containers either," Kira countered. "This vessel was hauling some serious cargo, the kind that requires serious protection." The pirate ships were closing fast, their engine signatures growing stronger on the tactical display. Tom made a command decision that would have seemed impossible to the quiet salvager Kira had first met years ago. "Do it," he said. "I'll cover our approach to the bridge. You focus on getting those systems online." They moved through the derelict's corridors with practiced efficiency, their partnership honed by months of working together in dangerous situations. Tom's military training and Kira's scientific knowledge had proven to be a formidable combination, allowing them to tackle challenges that would have defeated either of them alone. The bridge was a mess of shattered screens and dangling cables, but the core systems appeared intact. Kira immediately began working on the power restoration, while Tom established defensive positions at the entrance. "First pirate ship is docking," he reported, watching the tactical display. "Boarding party of 6, armed with standard energy weapons." "Almost there," Kira muttered, her hands flying over the alien control interfaces. The freighter's systems were a hybrid of human and alien technology, requiring her to translate between multiple technical languages simultaneously. The sound of cutting tools echoed through the ship's hull as the pirates began forcing their way aboard. Tom's expression grew grim as he calculated their chances of holding the bridge against superior numbers. "Got it!" Kira exclaimed as the bridge lights flickered to life. "Defensive systems are online and... oh, this is interesting." "What?" "This isn't just a freighter," she said, staring at the tactical readout in amazement. "It's a disguised military transport. Those aren't cargo containers in the hold, they're missile pods." Tom's grin was visible even through his helmet faceplate. "Can you target the other pirate ships?" "Already locked on," Kira replied, her fingers dancing over the weapons controls. "Firing now." The first missile salvo caught the pirates completely by surprise. 2 of their ships disappeared in brilliant flashes of light, while the third suffered critical damage to its propulsion systems. The boarding party that had just entered the derelict suddenly found themselves stranded on what they had thought was a helpless hulk. "This is Captain Rex of the Bloodhawk," a voice crackled over the communication system. "Surrender immediately or we'll detonate charges throughout your ship." Tom's response was to activate the freighter's internal security systems. Automated defenses that had been dormant for years suddenly sprang to life, filling the corridors, with stunning energy fields and non-lethal restraint systems. "Counteroffer," Tom said into his communicator. "Surrender immediately, and we won't launch any more missiles at your crippled ship." The negotiation that followed was brief and decidedly one-sided. Within an hour, the surviving pirates had been transferred to their damaged vessel and sent limping back toward whatever lawless port they called home. The Alterian container was safely aboard the Wanderer, along with several other valuable items they'd discovered during their exploration. Not bad for a day's work, Tom said as they secured the cargo bay. Kira smiled, feeling the familiar rush of satisfaction that came from turning a dangerous situation to their advantage. I'm starting to understand why you love this life. Our life, Tom corrected, pulling her close despite the bulky environmental suits. And it's only just beginning. As the Wanderer departed the asteroid field, Kira looked back at the derelict freighter one last time. Somewhere in civilized space, the colonial authority was probably still searching for them, and the Vorthon Empire was undoubtedly plotting revenge for their destroyed warship. But out here in the vast expanse of the Outer Rim, they were free to write their own story. The universe was dangerous and unpredictable, filled with hostile aliens and ruthless pirates, and 1,000 other threats that could end their journey without warning. But it was also beautiful and infinite, offering endless possibilities for those brave enough to seek them. Tom had saved her from 7 days of torture and a lifetime of broken dreams. In return, she had given him something he had never thought possible: a future worth fighting for and someone to share it with. The stars stretched endlessly before them, and they flew toward them together.